The National Desk, America's News, now.
Any private party that is found responsible and liable will be held accountable.
The investigation into what happened after a deadly cargo ship crash continues, and new questions tonight over whether there was any chance the bridge could have been saved. And a new development in the battle between Texas and the federal government over immigration authority. What a court just ruled and what happens next. Billions of dollars are expected to be bet on this year's NCAA basketball tournaments, the type of sports betting that the NCAA's president now wants banned. This is the National Desk, America's News. Now, thanks for being here with us. I'm Dee Dee Gatton. And as the recovery efforts continue following the deadly Baltimore bridge disaster yesterday, the investigation into what went wrong is already underway. NTSB Chair Jennifer Homedy says investigators have recovered the black box from the ship. The agency will use the device to develop a timeline of events leading up to the bridge collision to see if there was any way to avoid this tragedy. The National Desk Scott Taylor has more on these kinds of crashes and how minutes are like seconds to ships of this size.
Investigators now have in their hands the Dolly's Voyage Data Recorder, which was on the bridge at the time of the collision. It records the ship's electronic chart data information, rudder angle, and engine throttle settings. Captain Alan Post with Texas A&M University says the Voyage Data Recorder is key for investigators to determine exactly what happened.
It also records voice audio on the bridge, so everything that was happening on the bridge should be captured as well.
Reports say 2 pilots were on board. We do know any vessel moving through the port of Baltimore receives a great deal of help getting in and out from other pilots.
They use local pilots, and these pilots are advisors to the ship's master on local conditions and local navigation and how everything interacts in the port.
The Dolly was built in South Korea in 2015. It was inspected twice last year, and the only violation that was discovered was a faulty fuel pressure gauge monitor that was repaired. In 2016, the Dolly found itself in substantial stern momentum in the port of Antwerp in Belgium. It jumped onto a stone wall pier. The ship suffered sufficient damage in the stern and transom, and it had breached near the waterline. Last year, Synergy, based out of Singapore, who owns the Dolly, had a management deal in a tanker which collided with a dredger off the coast of the Philippines, killing 2, according to the Filipino Coast Guard. Synergy also had 2 other fatalities aboard vessels in 2018 and 2019 that were both unrelated to any shipping maneuvers. Synergy controls a fleet of nearly 400 vessels and employs more than 14,000 workers. These ships, they can't stop on a dime, right?
Absolutely not. This much inertia. A ship like that, it would take about 2 minutes to put the engines in reverse, and then it would take an additional 4 minutes for you to start seeing any type of braking action from the propeller. And that's almost all the time that they had between the failure and the time they alighted with the bridge.
And as the investigation continues, the Army Corps of Engineers is working to begin removing the debris of the bridge to get the Port of Baltimore open as soon as possible. Colonel S.G. Pinchason commands the Baltimore district.
We're taking every option to resource and bring assets to the site and get the team together so that as soon as the recovery period is over, we're able to initiate more in-depth operations for debris removal and restoring the channel. That's our top priority.
Although Pinchason says it's too early to assess the entire situation, including whether the Francis Scott Key Bridge's piers were damaged, the Navy is mobilizing to assist with the removal of the largest debris. A bill cracking down on squatters is heading to the desk of Georgia's governor. Both the state Senate and House unanimously passed it. The legislation gives squatters 3 days to produce documentation they are not trespassing. A hearing would then be held 1 week later. The bill's sponsors said it creates a clear path to get squatters out of homes and face charges. And it comes following a realtor's report of squatters taking over more than 1,200 homes in Atlanta. While in Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis signed a new anti-squatting law today that allows law enforcement to immediately remove squatters. The law also makes it a felony if more than $1,000 in damage is done to the property. This bill also passed through state legislature unanimously. And allies of DeSantis have reached a settlement agreement with Disney in a state court battle over Disney's World Futures development following the governor's takeover of Disney World's district. The takeover was in response to Disney's opposition to a Florida law banning classroom lessons on sexual orientation and gender identity in early grades. The new deal ends nearly 2 years of litigation. The would-be Texas immigration law known as SB 4 that would allow for the arrest of illegal migrants by state officials remains on hold. In a 2-to-1 ruling, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals denied Texas's appeal to allow the law to go into effect. The majority decision cited previous Supreme Court cases saying that controlling migration and removal of non-citizens is exclusively a federal power. Governor Greg Abbott can appeal to the Supreme Court, but hasn't indicated if he would do so yet. This ruling comes down as Governor Greg Abbott ordered 200 additional Texas National Guard troops to El Paso, Texas last night. And as a part of Operation Lone Star, they will assist with border security. Last week, migrants breached a fence and clashed with other National Guard members. But even in states not on the border crisis is costing taxpayers around the country billions of dollars. National correspondent Kayla Gaskins has more on the rising price tag.
The migrant crisis racking up a hefty price tag for state and local governments.
You're talking about maybe $80 billion in educational costs, maybe $25 billion in healthcare costs.
As they work to care for the massive influx of newcomers, many sent to them, courtesy of Texas Governor Greg Abbott in his effort to draw national attention to the border problem.
We're such a big country that people have been able to ignore the issue of illegal immigration over the years.
New York City rolling out a $53 million pilot program, giving out prepaid debit cards to migrant families.
There's no free money. These are not ATM cards. You can't take cash out. If anyone has that idea, they are wrong. This is for food and baby supplies only.
New York Governor Kathy Hochul asking state lawmakers to authorize $2.4 billion for migrants on top of the $1.9 billion already spent. NYC projecting they'll spend $10.5 billion on migrants by the summer of 2025.
I think we're doing a really good job under really challenging circumstances.
Massachusetts is spending $75 million each month on state-run migrant shelters. Denver is expecting to save $60 million as they close 4 migrant shelters there.
You cannot have open borders and a welfare state.
In Chicago, Mayor Brandon Johnson refusing to admit how much the city is paying to operate its 27 migrant shelters. One report places the cost of operating just 3 of these at nearly $1 million each week. Many residents have had enough, and they want to send a message to their leaders.
If we do not get issues resolved, people will not be voting how they used to before.
Leaders like New York City Mayor Eric Adams continue requesting additional federal assistance as pressure mounts on President Biden to show he's the candidate who can fix the border crisis. I'm Kayla Gaskins reporting for the National Desk, America's News Now.
A lawsuit has been filed on behalf of 2 families against an Ohio law that bans gender transitioning care for transgender children and trans participation in girls and women's sports. Ohio lawmakers overrode the governor's veto of the bill, which takes effect on April 24th. The families want the law to be struck down before then. They say their kids could lose access to critical health care. Here's a live look at Seattle, Washington this evening, where gun owners in the state will soon only have 24 hours to notify law enforcement if their legally owned firearms have been stolen or face up to a $1,000 fine. The new law drops that deadline from 5 days down to 1 in an effort to reduce crime. But critics say this only punishes law-abiding citizens who themselves are a victim of a crime.
This is before the trail gets cold, and this gives law enforcement the tools to investigate and identify patterns of gun trafficking.
The suggestion that that's going to do something to curb crime is just nonsense.
Seattle police said a study in 2023 shows that about a third of all guns seized by law enforcement were reported as stolen. The new law goes into effect May 9th. The 3 white men convicted of killing Ahmaud Arbery in 2020 are seeking an appeal. A panel of U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals judges in Atlanta heard arguments today. Lawyers for the men want their hate crime convictions tossed, arguing evidence of past racist comments did not prove intent to harm. The 3 men chased Arbery armed with guns in a pickup truck while he was running through a neighborhood. New video from the Colombian Navy shows the biggest cocaine shipment seizure of the year in the Caribbean Sea. U.S. and Colombian military officials seized nearly 4 tons of the drug, more than $113 million worth, following a high-speed chase after a speedboat. 5 people were detained, and the cocaine and boat were handed over to the Attorney General's office. Developing now, Hunter Biden's attorneys seek to have some or all of his 9 tax charges dismissed. They were in court today in Los Angeles. Prosecutors saying the president's son failed to file his taxes on time, missed deadlines to pay his debt, and engaged in tax evasion for years. Biden's lawyers say the prosecution is a result of pressure from Republicans. Meantime, Democrats want an investigation into former President Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, given new reports regarding his push for overseas business deals like in Serbia. This as the GOP looks towards legislation restricting such activity of the family members of presidents. Republicans have been investigating President Biden and his alleged role in his son's foreign business work. They've produced no evidence of illegality, and Biden says he's done nothing wrong. Coming up next year, we'll take a closer look at accusations the Biden administration faces for asking social media companies to remove certain posts about COVID-19. Then later, religious service attendance varies widely between states. New information reveals where it's most and least popular. And the safety threat that Utah women's basketball players say forced them to change hotels during the NCAA tournament this week. We're back in 90 seconds. In Murphy versus Missouri, top officials with the Biden administration are accused of breaking the law when they asked social media companies to remove posts about COVID-19, which they deemed misinformation. The Supreme Court heard arguments last week in this case that could have widespread implications on free speech in this country. Such questions about how far government officials can go have existed for decades, as Christine Frizzell reports.
The U.S. Supreme Court set to answer whether top Biden administration officials crossed a constitutional line when asking social media companies to remove posts like this, questioning the safety of COVID vaccines. Perceived overreach, often referred to as jawboning, a term defined in this 1970 article in the New York Times as implied threats by the administration as a means of convincing business or labor to adopt certain attitudes or policies.
You might threaten to cut off government contracts to steel companies that continue to raise their prices. That was one approach that Kennedy took.
It would add, Secretary McNamara informed me this morning, an estimated $1 billion to the cost of our defenses at a time when every dollar is needed for national security and other purposes.
From President Kennedy to President Biden, and most administrations in between, the most common justification for intervening is for the good of the country, including in the case before the court, when top health officials worried the spread of misinformation about COVID-19 vaccines could prevent people from getting them and therefore lead to more illness and death, or notifying big tech companies when their platforms are being used by pedophiles, terrorists, or other foreign adversaries.
We're spending so much of our effort trying to engage with the social media and technology companies because there is a very important role for them to play in terms of monitoring and, in effect, policing their own platforms.
But the Cato Institute's Will Duffield says in most cases, the actions amount to government bullying, as detailed in his in-depth report on jawboning, in which he makes the case that even absent an explicit threat, government can suppress disfavored speech by dissuading intermediaries from carrying it.
These demands supplant platforms' private judgment as to what they want to carry or refrain from carrying with that of the government, and that clearly violates the First Amendment.
These gray areas about what the government can and can't say to private companies could be cleared up when the Supreme Court rules on the matter later this year. I'm Christine Frizzell reporting.
Today, the United States and the United Kingdom jointly sanctioned a fundraising network that has been seeking donations since Hamas's terror attacks on October 7th. 2 individuals and 3 entities are listed, marking the 4th time the U.S. and U.K. have sanctioned Hamas fundraisers. Hamas is considered a terrorist organization by both the U.S. and Britain. Mideast ceasefire talks in Doha, Qatar, have stalled again as negotiators leave without a deal. CIA Director Bill Burns and Egyptian and Qatari counterparts had an agreement in place that was accepted by Israel, but was again rejected by Hamas. Hamas's leader abroad, speaking in Jordan today, said that no hostages will be released until Israel ends the war, allows for citizens to return home, and for the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip. Israel says they will not end the war until the hostages are returned and Hamas is eliminated. But the State Department still believes a deal can be reached.
We do think it's possible to bridge those differences, and we're going to continue to try to bridge those differences because we think a ceasefire that secures the release of hostages would be in the interests of the United States, in the interests of Israel, in the interests of the broader region.
But it seems time is on Hamas's side. As the longer the war goes, the less support Israel has. According to the latest Gallup poll, 55% of Americans say they disapprove of Israel's actions. 36% approve of the operation. Back in November, for comparison, half of Americans approved of Israel's actions and 45% disapproved. New details. Pope Francis seems to be in better health today than over the past few weeks. He walked on his own with a cane and spoke with a clear voice at his first public event since Palm Sunday Mass, when he skipped his homily. Francis has been having trouble walking and has been battling bouts of bronchitis, cold, and flu. Tomorrow, Pope Francis will visit a prison outside of Rome. Vermont has the highest share of people who say they never or rarely attend religious services of all the states. That's according to a new Axios analysis. Vermont is at 75%, much higher than the national average of 49%. Next are New Hampshire and Maine. Mississippi has the lowest amount at 32%, followed by Alabama and Louisiana. The U.S. and China are working to repair tense relations. Chinese President Xi Jinping met over a dozen American CEOs and academic leaders today in Beijing, encouraging them to invest in the country. Foreign direct investment in China is on the decline, according to its government. Some of the reasons are slow growth, regulations, and national security laws. NCAA President Charlie Baker wants to ban player prop betting in all college sports for the integrity of the sport. A prop bet is a wager that doesn't revolve around the final score, but instead on something an individual may or may not do during the game. Baker is asking state legislatures to remove college prop bets from legal betting markets. The American Gaming Association estimates around $2.7 billion will be bet on this year's men's and women's NCAA basketball tournaments alone. Local libraries are now offering something new to check out to bring generations together. Medical reporter Liz Bonas shares how it's all connected to the healthy history of any community.
Hey there, everybody. An oral history program that really is a national model for bringing together teens and older adults may hold an important lesson for all of us.
What about my childhood?
What do you recall?
That lesson pretty clear here at Kentucky's Madonna Manor Senior Living Facility.
There were 11 of us kids. My dad worked in a steel mill.
Students at the nearby Notre Dame Academy volunteered to learn it. You see, first up, it's clear that history has a way of making you really appreciate the past.
It was fun to see how a lot of them talked about their husbands and wives and their wedding traditions.
And value the present.
And it's fun to hear about everybody's different experiences.
This whole project brings together young students and older adults for what's called the Oral History Project.
I think anytime we can make those generational connections and allow the girls to just dive into the history of what their grandparents have experienced, I think that's just incredible.
Here's how it works. Area libraries, such as Kentucky's Kenton County Library, offer these kits for anyone to check out. They include a recording device and suggested questions to learn about building a relationship with an older adult.
A lot of them don't get to talk about themselves a lot, so it's nice to give them an opportunity to talk about their stories.
In this case, then, once a week as part of class time, these students stop here at the senior living facility and do the one thing many of us rarely have time to do. They listen to an older adult share their life history.
Coming up, how a scientist will be measuring animal reaction to the upcoming solar eclipse. We have reporters all across the country in your neighborhoods covering issues that matter to you. We're taking the pulse of America.
And another three-pointer for Utah.
While they were prepared for the pressure during the game, the University of Utah women's basketball team never expected what they'd experience off the court. They played in Spokane, Washington, but their hotel during the NCAA tourney was about 40 minutes away in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. In a press conference, we learned while the team was walking to dinner last Thursday.
When they were encountered by a truck displaying a Confederate flag, as the driver began spewing appalling racial slurs at them, also using the N-word.
Utes coach Lynn Roberts said post-game they moved to a different hotel for safety the following days.
It was a distraction and upsetting. Racism is real, and it happens.
Tony Vodacek, professor of imaging science at RIT, will be spending April 8th at Seneca Park Zoo to see if the eclipse provokes odd behavior in animals using audio moths.
Microphones will be put out a few days before
So we'll get kind of normal things, and then we'll have the eclipse occurring, and then leave them out for a couple days after that as well to see how they respond back.
Vodacek and the zoo have been collaborating for a few years and even traveled to Madagascar to study animals with audio moths. Now, they'll be using the technology to see if animals react to the eclipse.
I feel helpless at this point. I still feel helpless.
Hannah Donahue and 10-month-old Poppy were supposed to be on the East Coast with family as Donahue's broken foot heals. But they never made it on the plane at SeaTac Airport. Donahue claims she was denied a wheelchair for their Sunday flight despite reserving one ahead of time. The accommodation was even noted on her ticket.
I sat in the wheelchair, and like I said, I asked multiple attendants if they could just take me. And they just kept telling me no.
She describes first pleading for help at the Delta wheelchair assistance counter, but was told their staff were with other people or they would get a supervisor. But she says that help never came. While Delta is looking into what happened, Donahue is calling on the airline to have a more organized setup.
Coming up, all-time collegiate basketball scorer Caitlin Clark has a new offer on the table. How much rapper Ice Cube says he'd pay her. Iowa Hawkeyes superstar and all-time collegiate basketball scorer, everyone's talking about her, Caitlin Clark, has a new offer on the table. Rapper Ice Cube has confirmed his basketball league Big Three would give Clark $5 million to play in this year's Big Three season. The league, founded in 2017, is 12 teams who play 3-on-3 in a short 8-game season with 2 playoff games. Former NBA players have played, but Clark would be the first woman to play with the men. The Hawkeyes are still vying for the NCAA Women's Championship, so Caitlin could not accept any professional deal until her season is over. And that's going to do it for us for this edition of the National Desk. We invite you to join us again this evening for more coverage on America's top stories. Just check your local listings. I'm Dee Dee Gatton. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tonight.